Hey guys, so today I'm presenting what I believe is true. I'm thinking about this more in terms of, it's Christmas time and listening to this album. But I believe that the second law by Muse is actually has to do with elves and Santa Claus. And just hear me out by the end, and you might see it by my side. So, starting with Supremacy, Act One, Track One. Um, it's really about Santa Claus's policies, and how pretty much the elves need to revolt. They are in a cruel society. Um, you know, Santa Claus is very much an authoritarian ruler in this world, and the elves live under his strict control, and they must, relentlessly work under him and are very oppressed. Um, I think that's pretty self-explanatory at the beginning to start off. So moving on to Madness now. This is more of a, realization and thinking about um not as much as Madness is like a love interest, but like Madness as in, feeling oppressed and desperate. And it was like, is this real love or is it just madness? Like, are you doing it because you love your job and you love making toys, which of course they do, they're elves and working for Santa Claus, but at a point it gets to be too much. And it gets to be madness, and there's only so much they can do. So this is very much an era of, Thomas Paine-esque, if you think about the American Revolution, and published documents spread around the elf communities, and they think about these things, and this kind of leads to the beginning of a rebellion in a sense. So moving to track three, this is Panic Station. So the uprising begins to take shape, and the elves, start to rise up against Santa's regimes here and there, going on strikes, things like that. But they know they have to commit to their cause to take down the claws. Um, Even though, people are very scared at this point. Elves have um, followed behind Santa Claus for years, generations, eons even. Um, but they think about it, they talk things out, they have caucuses, and they decide that they're going to fight for their survival, which takes me perfectly into Survival, our next track. This is when the major protests start, major rallies, holding up Santa signs, just straight up rallying these guys. Like the battles, the small skirmishes intensify. Um, and they just embrace the idea of survival at all costs. And the elves are seeing this as like a race for their future with no turning back. And that is how we end Act One. So then moving into Act Two, um, we start with Follow Me. We have a protagonist here, the lead elf, of course. He's just urging other people to follow, and you can see, like especially in the second picture, the mass of elves that have, he's been accruing and been convincing to fight against Mr. Claus, and just offering a vision of hope and unity in the face of adversity during these times, and just rallying others to join the rebellion. Now here's where we start to turn. Track six is animals. Now the elves are fully engaged in the uprising, and they're just enraged at this point. Pretty much every elf, like if they weren't already on like the side of the elves that were doing the uprising, they were probably killed, which is a sad part about this. Um, they adopt a more ferocious and survivalist mentality, and that just shows their transformation into fierce warriors. They were going to take Santa Claus down at all costs. And I think that's exactly what Matt Bellamy's singing about when he's talking about when looking at the lyrics of Animals. Do the elves a favor and just kill yourself, basically. And it would have made their life so much better. So Explorers, this is an interesting one. I think this is it's before the biggest fight, the climax of the fight. But, they think that their fight isn't just for their freedom, but for the future that they can rebuild and for their children and their children's children. And it's a fresh start away from Santa's control. And while they're still ferocious and that their fierce mentality, they're fighting for their loved ones, which I think is it's a difference. I think when you fight for your loved ones, you have it's just something else there, and you fight for them. You just hope for a better future and breaking free from the past. So on that idea of hope, we close Act Two, move to Act Three, starting off with Big Freeze. This is the big one, guys. Intense final battle. Elves confront Santa Claus. A big freeze represents the moment when the elves finally gain the upper hand, freezing Santa's power and control, and the warmth of hope and change begins to spread amongst the elves. even in the face of this big freeze. So, they get their victory in the face of adversity, and they take down Santa Claus once and for all. So, track 9, Save Me. So, this is after the battle, and we see two factions here in a way, or just two sides of the same coin. Everyone's happy they won, as you see on the right. Lots of parties, everyone's happy. But it's very much psychological, because on the other side, it's like we just, tore down our whole society. And it's a moment of reflection for the elves for sure. Um, they're going to be haunted by the losses and the violence, and it's just like they wonder, like, were they truly saving themselves, or were they lost in the fight? And I think the song serves as a moment of reflection, definitely.
And quick editor's note, I couldn't move on from Save Me without failing to mention the use of jingle bells in the song, especially during the break, which I'll show you guys here. This is even more of a reason to back up this theory, and one of the first leads I had in discovering Matt Bellamy's true meaning behind this album. And when I heard the bells, it was like Polar Express. When you hear the bells, it means you believe. And so here's that clip for you now.
So track 10, Liquid State. This would, kind of conclude with the elves' victory and the collapse of the old regime. There will be some elves who heavily drink, especially our kind of, I think, feel like the protagonist in this case. He, is everyone's hoping for a brighter future, and like they rebuilt Santa's castle, but there will be theirs who, have PTSD from the war, post-traumatic Santa disorder, and there will be those who may not contribute to this new society due to the impacts that the battles have had on them, which is a sad thing for the elves. They fought, they slaved away for their whole lives, and then they fought in battle, and then there's going to be some, such as our protagonist here, who, you know, are just having a tough time coping with the new society. So then we move to kind of a scene 4, post-credits scene per se, with Second Law Unsustainable. And I would say that this one is when the elves realized that they simply replaced one oppressive system with the other. Because here's the thing, guys. At the end of the day, people still need their damn toys all around the world. And who's providing those toys? The elves. It all, follow the money, okay? And there's a large faction when things aren't looking good. A lot of people are like, okay, we're homeless basically. And some people would still resist and make toys, which okay, that's your right. But on the other hand, a lot of elves went back to making toys again because that's what they do best. That's what they know how to do. And that's what makes them money. So it's kind of an unsustainable system. They have to find a new way of living that didn't rely on like the old unsustainable practices. And it's like, did they just, replace one oppressive system with like a new one essentially? Um, and they kind of, it's the realization that old systems must be abandoned to like prevent future collapse, but at what cost? And then closing out Second Law Isolated System, to me this sets up for a sequel in a great way. It shows, the elves were all together, they banded all together, but by the end, it's a question of, do we isolate ourselves from the world? They can make their own toys, or do we go back to the old system in a way, but not with the Santa Claus, maybe in like a democratic elf regime, which would be really interesting to see, I think. And I think, on one side, Anyo toy, Fino toy, and like no more toys. But then there's some people who want to make more toys. So some elves that want to make more toys.
And it highlights the tension between the independence the elves now have in the North Pole, but also the need for connection around the world and for them to spread their joy through their toys. And I'd also like to add that Muse's famous Christmas performance was from 2009, which was just 3 years before the Second Law came out. So to get into Matt's mind here, you can see he was already in the Christmas mindset. And I like to think that as they were touring the Resistance and with this Christmas special in 2009, that this is where his inspiration came from as his mind started working towards the next album and writing the Second Law. And so I'm hoping that he sees this and makes a sequel to this album and releases the Third Law in 2026, so I can find out in his vision what the future of the Elf Society would look like. Thank you for watching a breakdown of Muse's best album.